designated room, Jessica's in-laws-to-be, John and Linda, were already seated. They seemed to have been talking about something, as their faces wore an eerily amused smile. I wondered what was so funny as I looked at the table, and saw that there were settings for 3 on our side. I realized this was a sly way of harassing us, and said to myself, I see. Please have a seat. Oh, it's just the 2 of you? We're a single-parent family. I lifted the corners of my eyes and replied as calmly as I could. But Linda still had a lingering smile. Right, I remember now. Maybe you should take this in a Tupperware? It must be tough being in a single-parent household. Linda covered her mouth with her hand, trying to suppress her laughter. Despite her harsh words, I didn't even bat an eyelid. Seeing this, Jessica tapped my shoulder. That's terrible. Mom, let's go home. Why's that? If it means you have to suffer, I'd rather not get married. Touched by my daughter's kindness, I smiled and firmly said, That's not necessary. Just wait a moment. Then, a female staff member came from behind with a takeaway box the size of a lunchbox, offering it to Linda with the words, Please, take this with you. John and Linda were taken aback, looking surprised. If being low income is tough, please, take this. What? My name is Emily Johnson. I'm in my 50s, feeling the midpoint of my life deeply as I live in a slightly spacious 3-bedroom house with my daughter, Jessica. When Jessica is at school, the emptiness of the living room feels lonely. During such times, I make it a routine to prepare 2 cups of tea. One for me, and the other for my late husband. Looking at the cup I poured for him, I feel comforted, thinking he might be here with me. He passed away from cancer about 20 years ago, just when we were about to start treatment. Just before he passed away, while lying in bed, he implored me about our only daughter, Jessica. Please take good care of Jessica. She'll surely do great. At that time, Jessica was too young to remember her father well. To keep my promise to my husband and not to let her feel lonely or hurt, I raised Jessica with all my might. Putting my needs second, I balanced work, house chores, and parenting, managing to send her to college even as a single parent. I might be biased, but Jessica turned out to be a beautiful, kind, and hardworking woman, excelling in her studies. She's my pride and joy. After graduating, she got a job at a corporation and started living on her own. I can't always rely on you, Mom. I'll start repaying you back, bit by bit. Don't worry about me. Just do your best. Eat properly, don't stay up late, and remember, I'm not a kid anymore, I'll be fine. What are you saying? You'll always be my precious child. On the eve of her move, Jessica and I talked about the past, the future, and her father until late into the night. We never ran out of memories to share, losing track of time. Even after she started living alone, my smartphone would frequently light up with her messages. From the struggles of unpacking and cooking, to her experiences at work and stories about her colleagues. Every message made me feel as if she was right there with me. Jessica must be feeling lonely in her first time living alone. But after half a year, the messages from her gradually became less frequent, changing from every 3 days to once a week. She's really doing her best. There's a saying that the absence of reliance is a good reliance. The lack of messages probably means that Jessica's days are fulfilling. Thinking this, even the tea I made for my husband seems to nod in agreement. When about 1.5 years had passed since Jessica started her job, on a warm, late autumn day, I received a call. It was Jessica, and as I answered, wondering what was up, she sounded excited, saying, "It's been a while. Mom, listen, I want you to meet someone this Sunday. Are you free?" "Oh, it's been a while indeed. I'm free this Sunday." "Great, I'll come home around noon, okay?" "Sure, that's fine. Be careful on your way." "It's been a long time since I've seen you, Mom. You're gonna be surprised, see you then." After saying that, Jessica hung up, and I was left in silence. I wondered when was the last time I had a phone conversation with her. Her unusually happy tone also caught my attention, But when Sunday came, I was indeed surprised, just like Jessica said. At the door, Jessica appeared with a young man named Ethan Parker. He wasn't dressed casually but in a neat, casual suit, looking a bit tense. "Nice to meet you. I'm Ethan Parker, dating Jessica." He introduces himself, tall and slender, with a face as handsome as a model's. He gave the impression of a polite and good young man. "Oh, Jessica has been in your care. Please come in." I offered him guest slippers and invited them to the living room. As I made tea and we sat at the table, Jessica shared her recent news and introduced him. Then, blushing, she said, "The reason I wanted you to meet him is, I want to marry Ethan." Marry! Though I had a hunch, it still struck a chord to hear that Jessica had found someone. I maintained my composure and looked at Ethan, who now seemed more serious than before. "Yes, I proposed to Jessica recently. And we wanted to meet with you, her mother." After a brief silence, I said, "I see. I didn't know Jessica had such a wonderful person in her life." "Ethan, Jessica grew up without a father. I raised her all by myself." "Yes, Jessica told me she was raised by a single mother." "Jessica is my treasure, my only daughter. Will you truly protect and make her happy?" "Of course. I'm confident I can make her happier than anyone else in this world." Ethan responded confidently, not intimidated by my demeanor. Had he faltered here, I might not have consented to their marriage. "I understand. Please take good care of Jessica." When I said this, the two exchanged relieved glances and smiled happily. Seeing them like this, I naturally found myself smiling as well. I think he would have smiled in the same way if he were here. A few months after sending off a happy Jessica and Ethan, Jessica took a long break and came home. She happily talked about her work and Ethan, but occasionally, she would have a troubled expression, which worried me. When asked, she would avoid the topic and say, "It's nothing, Mom." Jessica has a habit of shrugging her shoulders when she wants to talk about something or is lying. She shrugged this time too, so I was sure something was bothering her. "Hey, Jessica, how about we visit that new cafe that just opened? This one here." I pointed to the cafe on my smartphone screen. Her eyes lit up. "Oh, I've been wanting to go there. They're known for their original coffee. It's popular at work too." Then it's settled. The next day, Jessica and I walked to the cafe in the cool air. It was deep into winter, and the brown fallen leaves crunched under our feet. We ordered coffee to go and walked for a while. "Mom, thanks for accepting Ethan and me." He seems sincere. Take good care of each other. When we reached a large park, Jessica started to open up. "Actually, I went to greet Ethan's parents. They didn't seem to think much of me." Her story went back a month. She had gone with Ethan to greet his parents, John and Linda. But they seemed skeptical of her from the start. "Hello, I'm Jessica Johnson. I'm dating Ethan." "Ethan, are you sure about this girl?" Linda interrupted Jessica's greeting. "What do you mean?" "Just look at her. She looks poor, her clothes, her makeup. She's not a match for Ethan." Instead of congratulations, they openly criticized Jessica. "Mom, that's rude. How can you say that about my girlfriend?" "You think so too, right?" Linda even sought agreement from John, who simply nodded in affirmation. "Oh, is your family very poor? Do your parents work?" "My mother works, and my father passed away when I was young." "A single mother?" "I thought as much." John seemed oddly satisfied and scoffed. "Dad? It must be for the money. Ethan, our family is of a distinguished lineage. You shouldn't be with this kind of woman." "How can you say that? Jessica is different. I know her better than anyone." "You're just naive. There are plenty of people who would marry for our wealth." Shockingly, John even suggested introducing Ethan to a daughter of an acquaintance. Linda agreed and seemed pleased with the idea. "That's a good idea. After all, this girl's father works for a major listed company. She's not a match for a single-parent family. You think so too, right, Ethan? Seeing his mother happily agree, Ethan raised his voice. Enough, both of you. That day, the conversation went nowhere, and Ethan had to lead Jessica away from his parents' house. Later, Ethan told Jessica that both John and Linda had a strong sense of elitism. Jessica, I'm really sorry. My parents said such awful things and hurt you. He apologized repeatedly and promised to always protect her. Listening to this on a park bench, I was struggling to contain my anger. So, what did his parents say about the marriage? We went again last week, and despite their sarcasm, Ethan convinced them to accept us. Are you okay with that? Jessica bit her lip and shrugged. Yeah, I'm okay. We won't be living together, and I can handle it. All right. It was clear that the relationship between the Parkers and Jessica was strained. Even with Ethan's promise to protect her, there would be limits. Knowing the difficulties ahead, I wished I could advise her to reconsider the marriage. However, having already given my consent, that was no longer an option. Even in just this short period since the greeting, Jessica looked so downcast. The thought of her having to wear that sad expression for the foreseeable future was unbearable. About the meeting between both families, I think maybe I shouldn't attend. Why? Because I don't want to make you feel uncomfortable. I'd rather not have the meeting if it's going to upset you. Until then, Jessica had been acting bravely, but now her eyes seemed to well up. Though she didn't cry, she was evidently trying to spare me from the same unpleasant feelings. Her kindness pained me, but I smiled. Don't worry about me. Let's have the meeting properly, so your marriage is recognized by everyone. Under the cold sky, Jessica and I sipped our cold coffee on our way back home. When Jessica told Ethan about wanting to go ahead with the meeting, he seemed very surprised and worried about her. You don't have to push yourself, he said. I'm fine. Mom doesn't mind either. If that's what you want, I'll talk to my parents about it. On the day of the meeting, Jessica and I went to the venue. We were silent, but I decided to face the situation with my head held high and my chest puffed out. We took a taxi to the designated famous hotel, taking deep breaths at the entrance. However, Jessica was still anxious. When the hotel was chosen, Linda had made a snide remark, adding to Jessica's unease. That famous hotel featured in commercials. I know it's a place unfamiliar to your family. Such unnecessary comments should have been brushed off, but Jessica took them to heart and completely shrank into herself. I gently embraced Jessica's shoulder, signaling with my eyes, it's going to be okay, and we started walking together. At the entrance, Ethan, who seemed to have arrived earlier, was waiting for the elevator. Thank you for adjusting your schedules to meet today. Ethan looked much more nervous than the last time we met, sweating even in the cold of winter. No, thank you. We appreciate your efforts today. Well, you might have heard from Jessica, but this hotel is where my father works, and... Ethan stuttered, clearly worried his parents might say something offensive. Given their attitude towards Jessica, I expected they would treat me the same. I replied with confidence. Yes, I am aware. There's no need to worry. Besides, you look more handsome when you're confident. Ethan looked up sharply, just as the elevator doors opened, and an announcement indicated we should proceed upstairs. We stepped in and rode up to the designated floor. Entering the assigned room, John and Linda were already seated, smirking in a way that seemed both creepy and amused. Glancing at the table, I noticed that only 3 sets of dishes were prepared on our side. I immediately understood this subtle form of harassment. Oh, we've been waiting for you. Please take a seat. Oh? Just the 2 of you? We are a single-parent family. I replied, lifting the corners of my eyes, trying to stay calm. But Linda's smile turned into a sneer. Oh, right. Why don't you take this home in a container? You must be poor. Single mothers must have such low incomes, always hungry, right? That's right. The income of single-parent families is well known to be low. Linda covered her mouth with her hand, barely holding back her laughter. Despite the shocking comments, I remained unmoved. Seeing this, Ethan couldn't help but cry out. "Dad, Mom, stop it right now. This is too disrespectful." At that moment, Jessica tapped my shoulder. "This is terrible. Mom, let's go." "Why?" "If it means my mom, who sacrificed everything for me, has to suffer like this, I don't want to get married." Hearing this, Ethan turned around in shock. "Jessica!" I looked at them and said firmly, "That's not necessary. Just wait a moment." Then, a female staff member approached from behind with a lunchbox-sized pack and offered it to Linda. "Please, take this to go." Linda and John were taken aback, looking utterly confused. "If you're concerned about low incomes, please, take this." "What?" "At least Mrs. Johnson here is far from being poor." The staff member, speaking clearly, placed the pack down and stepped back gracefully. Linda and John were indignant. "You! How dare you do this?" "That's right. You're fired, fired." "Right, dear?" "Both of you, please calm down. She's an old friend of mine. The rude ones here are you too." The woman turned to me, smiled briefly, and said, "The division head is always so busy." "Division head!" Linda and John's reactions were comically exaggerated, almost tumbling off their chairs. John was sweating profusely, not just on his forehead but all over his face. I hadn't intended to hide it, but I am the daughter of the president of the group company that owns this famous hotel. I have worked for this company for many years, continuing even after marriage. When I was pregnant with Jessica, I took maternity leave like any other employee and raised her while working in place of my husband. By the time Jessica entered college, my efforts were recognized, and I was promoted to division head, thanks to recommendations from colleagues, but this couple was unaware of it. "Are both of you listening?" I addressed the two lying on the floor with a firm voice. "Today, we came here to discuss the marriage between my dear daughter and your son, Ethan. It seems you have spoken very poorly of my daughter." I glared at them, causing John and Linda to shudder. "I replaced my husband, who passed away from illness when my daughter was young, working hard to provide her with both love and education." Ethan swallowed nervously. "I trust my daughter and the person she has chosen. Even if they come from a family that judges others by income and behaves rudely, I see Ethan as a respectful and fine young man, an important addition to our family." I paused for a breath before continuing. "I believe you too care for your child. So, I ask again, do you accept the marriage of my daughter and Ethan?" The room fell silent. John and Linda were trembling, and Ethan seemed to hold his breath. Jessica had never seen this side of me before. She was speechless behind me. "Well?" Linda looked resentfully at John. He, pale-faced, adjusted his posture and hurriedly said, "Of course, division head. We look forward to a close relationship in the future. I am here today not as a division head, but as Jessica's mother," I firmly stated, looking at John. "And if we talk about work, aren't you soon to leave this place?" "What do you mean?" I had already investigated John's reputation within the company. When Jessica told me Ethan's father was John Parker, the name rang a bell. His disdainful attitude towards Jessica and being a hotel employee was a dead giveaway. He had a bad reputation in the hotel, and I had often heard about John's high-handed behavior towards his subordinates. Additionally, he was reported to be absent from work under the pretext of meetings, and a personnel hearing was imminent. "That's why you should really reflect on your own actions," I told the speechless John. Linda suddenly stood up, her face red with rage, and lunged at me with a wild scream. But when I easily dodged, she fell over with a groan, like a squashed frog. To Linda, who was sprawled on the floor, I delivered a final warning. "Also, know this, if you ever interfere with Jessica and Ethan's happiness, I won't stay silent." After pinning down the helpless couple, I urged Jessica and Ethan to leave with me. Of course, I left their handling to my childhood friend. Half a year passed, and it was now summer. The sticky humidity was tough to bear, especially in my 50s. The weather forecast promised another day of intense heat, making an umbrella essential outdoors. As I walked to the supermarket, I thought about what happened afterward. After the meeting, Ethan had apologized to Jessica and me several times. "I'm really sorry for my parents' disrespectful behavior." He was so apologetic he even bowed to the floor, prompting me to quickly lift him up. "You don't need to go that far. Your sincerity is apparent. It's just so embarrassing. I don't want anything to do with such parents anymore." "But they are the ones who raised you, aren't they?" "No, my aunt and uncle raised me. My parents left me with them until I went to college." I had always wondered why Ethan's character was so different from his parents' arrogance. It turns out his aunt and uncle, who raised him, were decent people. Recently, Ethan formally cut ties with his parents after they came begging for money. After the meeting, Linda called Ethan in a panic. "Ethan, your dad lost his job. They said it was due to job negligence." But Ethan responded indifferently. "That's tough. Don't talk like it's someone else's problem. We're out of money, you need to send us some." "Mom, I know about it. Uncle told me you have a spending habit, right?" "What are you talking about?" "If you could just get rid of that habit, wouldn't our lives be more comfortable? Please stop relying on me. That guy, always saying unnecessary things." After that, there were several more phone calls. Linda had exhausted her savings because of her spending habit, and even John's retirement fund was running low. Struggling financially, Linda and John were not only asking for money but also insisted on speaking to the division manager. They kept calling all the time, morning, noon, and night, so eventually, Ethan's patience ran out. "Both of you, just stop it. I don't want to cause trouble for my wife or mother-in-law." Saying that, he abruptly ended the call and blocked their numbers. Not only that, Ethan changed his cell phone number and moved to a new apartment with Jessica, changing their address. Of course, he didn't tell his parents, so John and Linda had no way of knowing what happened to Ethan and Jessica afterwards. This removed any disturbances in the couple's happy married life. From what Jessica told me, since then, they have been living peaceful days together. As for me, I've managed to build a good relationship with the newlyweds, having meals together 2 or 3 times a month. Also, this incident made me realize a big misunderstanding. I had been working hard to ensure Jessica didn't face hardships raising her on my own, but in doing so, I had completely stopped going on trips, which was my hobby. Jessica thought she was the reason I gave up my hobby. My efforts to spare Jessica any worry or hardship ended up making her worried about me. "Don't worry about me from now on. I want you to spend time and money for yourself, Mom." Until Jessica said that, I was enjoying living alone at home, but since then, I started going on trips on weekends. I, who loved domestic travel, started visiting places I wanted to see and places with fond memories. Strangely enough, as I worked hard in my daily job, I began to feel it's okay to spend time and money on myself. Moreover, exploring recent lodging facilities has even benefited my work. Projects have been progressing more smoothly, killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Thinking of this as thanks to Jessica, I finished paying at the store and left. Today's shopping was also for ingredients to cook dinner together with the 3 of us. Looking up, I saw Jessica coming from the opposite side. "Mom, are you okay? Don't overdo it, let me carry that for you." Jessica hurried over and easily lifted the shopping bag in my right hand. "Oh, thank you. Shall we go then?" "Yeah, Ethan's gonna come right after he finishes work. He's been looking forward to your summer vegetable curry," Jessica said, smiling sweetly. "I'll have to make plenty then." Recently, there was happy news. Jessica is pregnant. This made not only me and Ethan happy, but Jessica as well. I'm secretly planning to send clothes and toys for the grandchild, keeping it a surprise for the 2. Though I wonder if it's too early, I know the child will be here before we know it. I'm already eagerly awaiting the day I can meet this new life. You miscarried because you weren't careful enough. Christina, haven't you gotten pregnant again since then? I'm sorry. Blamed by Michael and my mother-in-law, I spent my days in a confined world. I never thought I'd be blamed alone for the miscarriage and not having a child afterward. My heart was completely worn down by this marriage. Then 7 years passed. I miraculously became pregnant. I thought I would never have children again. It was like a bolt from the blue. Michael, who was overjoyed, changed his tune. Really? Awesome! Without changing my expression, I calmly said, I want a divorce. What? Shocked, Michael and my mother-in-law faced me as I shouted, I know all about what Michael has been doing. Stop making a fool of me. What Michael had done was unforgivable. My anger blazed unceasingly, burning ever higher. My name is Christina King, 29 years old. I married Michael, my classmate from vocational school, 8 years ago, at 21. We still don't have kids. Currently, I live with Michael, his parents, and my younger sister Marilyn, a high school student. That's 5 of us. The reason for this living arrangement goes back to when I entered vocational school. I've always loved baking. So, after high school, I enrolled in a pastry chef school. Michael, my husband, was a classmate. We got along very well and started dating soon. College life was so much fun. Just before graduation, my parents died in an accident. It was so sudden, I was engulfed in grief. But I couldn't just cry forever. I had my younger sister Marilyn. She was still in elementary school. I had a job lined up at a famous bakery, but thinking about living expenses and Marilyn's tuition weighed heavily on me. The insurance money from my parents' accident had been used up on medical expenses for my sick grandparents. Could I support Marilyn on my starting salary? When I was feeling anxious, Michael was the one who offered me a lifeline. Let's get married and move to the countryside together, with your sister too, he said. Michael was the heir to a traditional confectionery store. He planned to take over the family business after graduation. I intended to marry Christina sooner or later, it just happened sooner than planned. He assured me that once we were married, his family could help with Marilyn's tuition and living expenses. Of course, I had my doubts about accepting such an offer so easily. But Michael firmly said, Christina, you're practically family already, it's only natural to help each other out. His words were so comforting, I cried. I declined my job offer and became part of the Michaels family. Michael's family lived in the countryside. The traditional confectionery shop run by my in-laws, King, is a long-established business dating back 140 years. In the local community, it was a beloved shop known to everyone. My in-laws welcomed me and Marilyn warmly. I felt safe with them. They even promised to support Marilyn's education and living costs. I remember feeling very relieved. But looking back now, I can only think I was ignorant of the world. I had been thinking naively. I had no idea that marrying into this family would change my fate so dramatically. After marrying Michael, I worked at the confectionery daily. Mostly, I helped my mother-in-law with ordering supplies and managing expenses. Only my father-in-law and Michael actually made the confections. During busy times, some male part-timers from a confectionery school would come to help. It's not that I'm dissatisfied with my current job. But I graduated from a patisserie school. Yet, I haven't made a single confection. I want to work in the kitchen too. Even just to help with preparations. When I tell Michael this, he just says, well, maybe someday, avoiding a clear answer. I felt a bit frustrated, but I had no choice but to comply. As time went on, I got pregnant. 4 months in, we found out it was a boy. Michael and my in-laws were overjoyed. I was happy too. One day, when I was feeling uneasy, I started experiencing stomach pains from the morning. I had a bad feeling about it. I rushed to the nearby OB/GYN. The doctor, who had been taking care of the King family, was recommended to me by my mother-in-law, and I had been visiting here. The elderly doctor began with, "I'm sorry to say." Then slowly, he announced, "You've had a miscarriage." My mind went blank. Stunned, I underwent the necessary procedures and returned home. Could there be anything more heartbreaking? When Michael asked, "How did it go?" I reported back to him through tears. That's when Michael's attitude changed. "What? You had a miscarriage? Why?" "I don't know. There can be many reasons for a miscarriage, they couldn't pinpoint one." "What? Isn't it because you weren't careful enough?" I was shocked by Michael's angry response. I thought. I was expecting comfort, but his reaction was unexpected. I couldn't believe what he said, and as I stood there dumbfounded. My mother-in-law also arrived upon hearing the commotion. "That's right, Christina. It's a shame, expected a boy, and you miscarried. You've let us down." "I didn't. Don't you know? You're supposed to bear a male heir for the King family. If you can't do that, you have no place here." My mother-in-law said this with a terrifying look and returned to her room. I never expected to be spoken to like this. The shock of the miscarriage and the harsh words left me stunned. It took me a long time to recover. Not a single word of sympathy from Michael or my mother-in-law. Instead, they hurled even more bitter words at me. "Geez, how long are you going to keep that gloomy face? Just forget about it already. If you have time to be down, start thinking about the next child. Make sure a safe delivery of a boy this time." My father-in-law was silent, but it was clear he agreed with them. Their looks towards me became harsher. After the miscarriage, I felt like I was walking on pins and needles in this house. It wasn't my fault I miscarried. The cause was unknown. I explained this over and over, but they insisted it was due to my poor health or behavior. I couldn't believe it. In this day and age, to think such people still exist. Sure, for self-employed families, having an heir might be important. But the King family's obsession was bizarre. I think the gender of the child shouldn't matter, but Michael and his parents were desperate for a boy. Scarily so. However, the real horror was yet to come. After that, I couldn't get pregnant for a while. Each time, Michael and his parents grew colder. "How many months has it been since then, and you're still not pregnant?" "I'm sorry." I was saddened by my mother-in-law's heartless words. She had been so kind at first, but now she had completely changed, a total 180. Michael was the same. He joined in belittling me. A boy or a girl, it should be a precious child. Michael always said, "Make sure you give birth to a boy." He said it was for the sake of the King family's legacy, but it's absurd in this day and age to insist that the heir has to be a boy. That's what I think, but under their cold stares, I often felt down. I have to have a boy. I researched infertility. It can be caused by men too, not just women. With that in mind, I suggested that Michael should also visit the OBGYN with me. But he opposed it fiercely. "Why should I go to an OBGYN? It's your fault we can't have kids." Michael and his parents seemed to think it was my fault. Disappointed, I fell back into a gloomy routine. The only time I felt at peace was when I was with Marilyn. With no parents, I'm practically a parent to her. After work, I'd listen to her school stories every day. Sometimes I'd help her with homework or play with her. Marilyn always looked up to me, calling me big sister. She came to a strange land with me, never complained, and tried her best to adapt. Marilyn was my emotional support. On the other hand, my in-laws' attitude remained the same. I had suggested infertility treatments like in vitro fertilization, but they just gave me suspicious looks. To get pregnant through such a mechanical method is unacceptable. It must be a natural pregnancy, no less. That's my mother-in-law's catchphrase. The family that runs the traditional shop, which had been passed down through generations for a long time, but the people of the King family had outdated ways of thinking. I sighed. It's too unfair to blame me alone for not having a child. I even consulted with the OBGYN. But the doctor, who's been with the King family for a long time, shared a similar view to my mother-in-law. We are strictly aiming for natural conception. We don't do in vitro fertilization, so you'll have to go to a city hospital for that. The city hospitals are too far to realistically go from here. I'm at a dead end. Unexpected stress started affecting my body. I began to experience irregular menstrual cycles, making it even harder to conceive. Then, one day it happened. I was about to go to sleep and looked at the clock. It was 11 p.m. Michael must be coming home late again. A few times a week, he comes home late. Because of preparations for the next day. I was told to go to bed first, so I had already gone to my bedroom. That night, I went to bed early. But for some reason, I couldn't fall asleep. I got up to drink some water. And passed by the living room. That's when I heard it. Michael and my mother-in-law's voices. They were back. I was about to say something, but I stopped in my tracks. What they were talking about was unimaginable. "You're late." Can't help it, she wouldn't give it back. She kept asking when I'd leave my wife. I told her I'd think about it if she had a boy. Just a routine task for me to plant my seed in other women, but they take it seriously, annoying really. I had hopes when she got pregnant last time. A girl was a disappointment. Well, if it doesn't work out, we'll look for someone else. Yeah. The Kings need a boy, not a girl. And since she miscarried the boy, and hasn't been pregnant since. If she gives birth to a boy, you should leave Christina. Of course. I couldn't understand what they were talking about. It seemed from the conversation that Michael was cheating. And he was nonchalantly talking about his mistress being pregnant with a girl. I felt my legs shaking. Is this a dream? They both wanted a boy. To the extent of cheating, or rather, treating it like a task. I was so shocked, I had to leave the spot. They were secretly trying to have a child with another woman, behind my back. Both kept saying it was for the King family, but that's just an affair. Unbelievable. Do they want a boy that badly? That's when it hit me. The part-time workers dispatched from the confectionery school were always boys. There should be many women aspiring to be pastry chefs, yet they never hire women. I casually decided to ask. Why do they only accept men? Of course, I couldn't ask anyone from the King family directly. I decided to ask a boy who helps out at the shop. A student from the confectionery school who works the most during his long holidays. Hey, only boys come to help out here, right? Don't girls like this place? I asked nonchalantly, and the boy answered straightforwardly. Not at all. There are plenty of girls in my class who want to work at the Kings. But the job listings at school are for males only. Really? Didn't you know? Oh, right, Christina, you're not originally from here. This shop doesn't allow women in the kitchen. The Kings are quite traditional, believe in customs and all. The boy seemed to regret speaking too much and clammed up. But I pressed on. What customs? Tell me. He reluctantly shared. The Kings had always been succeeded by men. A few generations back, there was a time when no male heir was born, and a woman had to work in the kitchen. But for some unknown reason, the taste and popularity declined, and the King's business suffered. They ended up in massive debt. However, a miracle boy was born later and took over, turning the business around. Since then, there's been a superstition in the King family that if women make confectionaries, the business will fail. That's why women are no longer allowed in the kitchen. Even the part-time help positions were exclusively for men. The locals seemed to know about the King family's customs through word of mouth. So that was it. I finally understood. Michael never let me work in the kitchen. His parents' abnormal desire for a male heir. That's why they turned cold towards me after I miscarried the boy. And then that night's conversation. Desperately trying to have a boy with a woman who wasn't his wife. But isn't that an unethical act? Being unfaithful over some silly superstition. And it seemed like he planned to leave me if the mistress gave birth to a boy. What do they think of people? Treating women as mere tools for childbirth, I was trembling with anger. I wanted nothing more than to leave this house, to divorce. But there was Marilyn. Since I relied on the Kings for her tuition and living expenses, I couldn't divorce until she graduated high school. I had to endure until Marilyn's graduation. But just enduring wasn't enough. I began plotting my revenge against Michael and his parents. Time passed. Years went by, and I was now 29. I had a plan. For it, I needed to make the Kings as famous as possible. I started actively promoting the Kings on social media. Slowly, their popularity grew, and eventually, they became a nationally known store. Though an old establishment, the Kings had been only a local famous shop. Now, they were a household name, featured on TV and in magazines. Michael and my mother-in-law were happy with my work. They were still cold about not having a male child, but my success with social media and boosting the store's business had secured my place in the family. The plan was working. But I was hesitant to execute it. I owed the Kings one thing: they paid for Marilyn's tuition. But Marilyn was about to graduate. She was acquiring medical qualifications while in school. So, Marilyn had already secured a job as a medical office assistant at a small clinic. "I'm glad you got the job offer. But you chose a hospital quite far away, huh?" Marilyn answered with a somewhat somber expression. "Yeah. I wanted to be far away from here." "You mean?" "Sorry, sis. I'm grateful to the Kings for providing for my living expenses and high school tuition. But..." Marilyn hesitated. When I pressed her for more information, I learned something shocking. Apparently, Michael had tried to assault Marilyn. He said things like, "Christina can't have kids, so you have to fulfill the duty, or I'm paying for your tuition, so pay me back with your body." Thankfully, he was drunk at the time, and she managed to resist and avoid it, but the next day, he warned her, "Don't tell anyone about last night." I felt dizzy. Marilyn had kept quiet about it, considering my position. She had long known I was being blamed by them due to my infertility. "Finally, when I graduate high school, we can get away from the Kings. You don't have to stay here and suffer because of me. I'm sorry for making you endure all this." Marilyn spoke through tears. "No, I should apologize for putting you through this. If I had seen Michael's true nature earlier..." I apologized to Marilyn, crying. Unforgivable. A fierce flame of anger rose within me. It was one thing for them to involve me, but to involve Marilyn too. The Kings used the fact that they were paying for tuition and living expenses to torment us. I had been thankful and grateful when they said they would take care of Marilyn. But now, it felt like they had said it just to tie me to the Kings. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to divorce immediately. And I had to carry out my plan. That's when I decided. But then, something unexpected happened. I couldn't believe it and asked the doctor repeatedly. I was pregnant. Ever since I found out about Michael's infidelity, being intimate with him was a torment. But if I refused, he would verbally abuse me. I had no choice but to comply. And for 7 years, stress had caused me to have irregular menstrual cycles. I thought I couldn't have children, but the irony was that the moment I decided to divorce, I got pregnant. But my decision remained unchanged. I resolved to announce my pregnancy. Michael was surprised, then delighted. He suddenly started praising me. "Wow, pregnant! That's great! What's the gender? Tell me quickly." "It's too early to know, it's still the beginning." "That's right. We can't be sure yet. It has to be a boy." It seemed my mother-in-law had been listening to the conversation. "That's right. Let me know as soon as you find out." They were as selfish as ever. Without changing my expression, I said calmly, "I want a divorce." What? Michael and my mother-in-law were shocked. I glared at them and let it all out. I know Michael has been cheating for years. No matter how desperate you are to have a boy, it's not excusable. Stop making a fool of me. I have solid proof of your infidelity. After that, I followed Michael when he came home late. He was indeed visiting another woman's house. She seemed to be a high school classmate of Michael's, who had always admired the prestigious King family. It must have been easy for Michael to seduce such a woman. I captured several photos of them together, looking intimate. When I showed the evidence, Michael was taken aback. But he quickly retorted. What are you talking about? This isn't cheating. It's all because you couldn't give birth to a boy. I had no choice but to find another woman to preserve the Kings. Really? And assaulting Marilyn was also unavoidable? Well, that. Michael was at a loss for words. He must have felt guilty. But then my mother-in-law sighed. Her following words were horrifying. Oh, what do you think we took your sister for? If you couldn't do it, we expected Marilyn to fulfill the duty. Anyone will do, as long as they can give birth to a boy. Being able to bear a male child is the only condition to stay in the King family. You worked hard on the social media promotion for us, maybe out of guilt for not having a child. Well, the store became famous because of it, and we appreciate that. But if you can't have a boy, you have no right to be here. Understand? Do these people have no human heart? They saw Marilyn as just a backup plan for me. All they care about is preserving the Kings. I don't understand at all. Is the family so important that you'll hurt our hearts for it? Unbelievable. I can't stay in this absurd, nonsensical family any longer. When I shouted, my mother-in-law made a bitter face. On the contrary, Michael snorted. People outside the King family will never understand, Christina. That's all you were. If you want to divorce that much, fine. But he said if it's a boy, he wants the child. He doesn't need a girl. How can he speak about his own child like this? I never thought they could be so cold. They seemed like a family crazed with superstitions. I had no choice but to agree to these terms. In return, if the child is a girl, they have to promise never to involve themselves with me again. And so, I was finally able to divorce Michael. On the day I left the King family, I was packing my things. Marilyn had already moved to an apartment rented by her employer. It was too dangerous to stay in the King household any longer. While I was packing, Michael appeared. Hey, isn't it time to find out the baby's gender? Go to the hospital quickly. Even at this time, he's worried about that. I despised him. But I wouldn't have to come here anymore. As a final goodbye, I went to the usual OBGYN. The elderly doctor quickly diagnosed, it's a girl. Their faces, when I told them, were as if to say, see, I knew it. They seemed to have completely lost interest in me. But I didn't care anymore. What these people think doesn't matter. I just wanted to leave the house as soon as possible. This long but short marriage was over. I felt relieved as if a burden had been lifted. But there was still one last thing to do. I updated the King's social media account. And then I left the King house. Afterward, I stayed with Marilyn for a while. Just to be safe, I had informed her workplace that I would be living with her. The clinic director, knowing our situation of having no parents, readily agreed to let me stay. I was grateful for that. Then one day, my phone vibrated intensely several times. It was an angry call from Michael. Hey, Christina. What have you done? I knew the reason for his anger. The last post I updated detailed all the wrongdoings of the Kings. Their detestable customs and Michael's cheating habits. It spread everywhere, appearing in all sorts of media. As the Kings had become a famous store, they were featured prominently on TV news and the internet. They were being bashed relentlessly. If it had been just a small countryside confectionery, it wouldn't have blown up this big. I had ostensibly worked on social media to make the kings more prosperous and famous. But my true intention was different. If you're to drop someone down from a mountain to the valley, it's better to make the fall from the highest, all at once. That's why I raised the king's fame. I successfully marketed them into a fame unusual for a countryside confectionery. When the time was ripe, I dropped the bomb. I thought we agreed you wouldn't involve yourself with me anymore. I retorted calmly. Yeah, but... Stop being deluded by silly superstitions and treating people like fools with your outdated thinking. You're scum. Get bashed by the public and reflect on your ridiculous actions. I said forcefully and hung up the phone. Shortly after, I went into labor. Fortunately, the clinic where Marilyn worked was an OB/GYN, so I had been attending there. And when I gave birth, it turned out to be a boy. The diagnosis of the country doctor was wrong. Apparently, it's possible to mistake a girl for a boy due to the position of the umbilical cord. But the doctor chuckled. Normally, it's clear enough not to make such a mistake. That doctor was the longtime physician for the King family. Perhaps after years of accommodating the Kings, his skills had dulled? I thought so, feeling fortunate amidst the misfortune. Anyway, if the Kings knew this child was a boy, they would do anything to take him back. I decided to keep silent. The baby's name is Ray. I chose a gender-neutral name for Ray, just in case the Kings ever found out. Ray grew up blissfully unaware of the adults' issues. Meanwhile, the scandal of the Kings didn't die down. Their thoroughly outdated custom of excluding women. Michael's numerous affairs, all excused by succession. These became perfect fodder for a scandal-hungry public. The rumors about the Kings were wildly and fiercely spread. Their reputation affected their business significantly. Their regular corporate customers from hotels and inns started canceling one after another. And the number of walk-in customers decreased. Gradually, their business went into debt. And eventually went bankrupt. Michael and his parents now apparently live in a small apartment. To cover the debts, they had to sell their house and store. Shocked by their downfall, Michael's parents fell ill. Michael now spends his days caring for them. And of course, being looked down upon by the locals, but also the relentless bashing on social media by strangers. Their names, photos, and even their address were exposed online. They've had endless troubles like graffiti on their house and stones thrown at them. To me, it was all their own doing. A family that believed in outdated superstitions and dehumanized people. No matter how famous their confectionery was, who would want to eat it knowing the people behind it lacked any compassion? Watching Ray play with his toys, I thought about it. Here was the boy the Kings had so desperately wanted. It's ironic that they went bankrupt after a boy was finally born. Captured by their own agenda, they lost sight of what it means to be human. Ray looked at me curiously. I decided to stop thinking about them. My revenge was over. It was time to use my time for myself. I made up my mind to pursue something I had been envisioning. As time passed, Ray entered elementary school. At the same time, I decided to rent an apartment. I couldn't keep staying in Marilyn's workplace apartment forever. Besides, I had received a substantial amount of money. I had become a pastry chef, making my own cakes. I rented a small shop to sell them. At first, they didn't sell much, but gradually they became popular through word of mouth. From there, corporate customers like nearby hotels started increasing, and my business got on track. That's why I was able to plan for renting an apartment to live with Ray. I was so happy to be working as a pastry chef again. After all, I hadn't made sweets for a while since marrying into the Kings. But when I made sweets again and saw Ray's smile, my old passion was rekindled. I wanted to make my own sweets again. To see the smiles of people eating them. That was my original starting point. I remembered that. Imagining the smiles of those who eat my creations. That gives me more strength than anything. I may not become as famous as the Kings, but that's okay. If I put my heart and soul into it, those who eat it, and everyone around them, will surely smile. Ray and Marilyn enjoy the sweets I make with delight. Just that alone makes my heart feel fulfilled. Despite everything, I am very happy now. I can say that from the bottom of my heart, and I can't help but smile. Please, take care of these two for me, he begged. I couldn't help but feel utterly exasperated with him. The nerve of him to ask me to even take care of his mistress was just outrageous. What? Why don't you ask your parents? What are you saying? Should I make my elderly parents take on such a burden? You're heartless. Oh, your mother-in-law would probably be delighted to help, wouldn't she? And what position are you in to be saying such things? Mark, my husband, despite being in a position to ask for help, never lost his arrogant attitude. Watching him, I couldn't help but wonder what I ever saw in him. Excuse me, coming through. Just then, a new bed was brought in next to us. I glanced over, recognized who it was, and couldn't help but scream. What? Ivy? The woman in the bed was someone I knew very well. I never imagined you were Mark's mistress, I said glaringly, and she looked away. Now, what am I supposed to do with them? We're family, so help us out, will you? While watching the two of them cling to me, begging for help, I found myself deep in thought. My name is Hazel Smith. I'm a 35-year-old housewife raising a lovely 10-year-old son, Sebastian. I have a younger sister, Ivy, who is 6 years younger, and frankly, we've never gotten along. Ivy was irresponsible and ran off with a man as soon as she graduated high school. I'm sorry, Hazel. I know I shouldn't be causing you stress right now. My parents lamented over Ivy's choices and made sure it didn't bring mental unstableness on me. They didn't want to worry me as I was pregnant at the time. However, they had no choice but to inform me after Ivy ran off with all the family's savings. That news did indeed cause me great mental distress. Are you okay, Hazel? You need to prioritize your baby now. Mark had supported me during that time. He suggested I go back to my parents' place for the birth, which turned out to be a great help. It allowed me to support my parents financially with my savings and safely deliver Sebastian. By the way, I've since been repaid by my parents for that money. Thank you, Mark. Your suggestion really helped me feel at ease. Don't mention it. I asked you to quit your job for me, so it's the least I could do. Mark and I used to work at the same company. Mark had been my mentor at work. I admired how diligently he taught me, and his confession led to us dating. When I became pregnant with Sebastian, we decided to marry. He said, I want my wife to be at home. If you don't mind, would you quit your job? So, I decided to leave my job for marriage. Despite some regret about leaving work, it allowed me to support my family, which in hindsight, was a good thing. And it was good that Sebastian's birth brightened our home, which had been shadowed by Ivy's actions. Hey, Mom. Need any help with anything? Could you clean the bathtub? Sure, leave it to me. Sebastian, now a big boy, is still so sweet and adorable. He plays energetically every day, does his homework when I ask. Sebastian's current obsession with helping around the house often had him asking if there was anything he could do. His excitement and willingness to help always bring a smile to my face. All done. Thank you. Here's your allowance for helping out. Yay! He was thrilled, though I wondered if his eagerness to help was partly for the allowance. Regardless, living together as a family like this made me genuinely happy. One day, while I was busy with housework, Mark's mother called. You haven't visited in a while. Come over this weekend and bring Sebastian. I'll prepare a feast. I'm sorry, we already have plans for this weekend. Really? Is it something that can't be rescheduled to another weekend? I'll talk it over with Mark, I said, trying to dodge a direct answer. It hadn't even been a month since our last visit. I know she's not a bad person, I thought to myself. My in-laws are nice people, and I've never felt mistreated by them. However, Mark's mother adores her only son and her grandson, Sebastian. This made his parents eager to have us at his parents' house. It wasn't that I disliked going there. As a daughter-in-law, I wasn't overworked or mistreated. They treated me more like a guest, not even letting me help in the kitchen. However, being at the in-laws always required being on my toes. Sebastian takes after me, he's really bright. Good thing he doesn't take after Hazel in that regard. She was always slow at work, probably struggled with her studies too. Moreover, whenever we visited Mark's parents' house, Mark would start drinking from the daytime. He would then talk to his father in a way that belittled me. "Hazel, you need to try a bit harder." His father would hear this and, without listening to my side, would chime in. Their remarks always made me uncomfortable. There was another issue I had. "Grandma wants us to visit this weekend. What do you think, Sebastian?" "If it's Dad's mom, I don't really want to go." The issue was Sebastian's reluctance to visit. At 10 years old, he finds his grandparents' house boring. Their neighborhood is quiet with no parks or natural areas to play in. The backyard could have been a play area, but it's full of my father-in-law's flowers, making it difficult to run around. So, Sebastian brings his homework and PC games, but "You don't need to do homework, Sebastian, you're smart enough. We don't understand these games and no fun, let's talk instead." They'd take away his entertainment. And my protests were met with a dismissive sure, from them, and Mark told me, it's okay once in a while. It's understandable, considering how uninteresting those visits were to him. "I'd rather go out with you and Dad than visit Grandma's," Sebastian would sometimes suggest to Mark, but he would dismiss it, saying, "Visiting my family is our outing." Even when I try to advocate for Sebastian's wishes, Mark insists, catering to every whim isn't good for his upbringing. Mark claims this, but he's hardly been involved in Sebastian's upbringing. When Sebastian was a baby, Mark used my stay at my parents' house as an excuse to visit only occasionally. He left all the diaper changes and baths to me and my parents. He probably held our child only a handful of times. When I wanted to return home, Mark would insist, "It's better for you to stay at your parents' for now." At the time, I thought he was being considerate, but now I see it as his reluctance to participate in parenting. Perhaps his eagerness to take Sebastian to his parents' house stems from not wanting to deal with him himself. "Dad's just not interested in me," Sebastian said, echoing the sentiment about Mark. Hearing this, I couldn't help but feel troubled. This week, I had planned to take Sebastian to my parents' house. Therefore, I decided to talk to Mark when he returned home, hoping to somehow convince him to decline the visits. "My parents' house should be the priority. But we went there almost every weekend last month, and it's only been a couple of weeks since. We haven't been to my parents' house in nearly a year, even though Sebastian spent time there as a baby." Mark's parents often insist on our visits because they didn't get to see Sebastian much when he was a baby. "We couldn't see him much then, so now we want him here," they would say. To be clear, it's not like they never saw him as a baby. They even stayed at my parents' house for about a week. The in-laws had always been merely guests in our lives. Moreover, my parents saw Sebastian only a couple of times a year since we moved back to our place. "Your parents' house is just boring for me." "Enough. We've had this visit planned for 6 months. If you prefer your parents' house so much, why don't you go alone?" "Fine, I will," he replied easily. I wonder if he really cared about our family. I tried to shake off such thoughts, but they lingered. I started working from home to prepare for situations like this. It wasn't much, but it kept me from overthinking. And it helped me save a little. If I want Mark to be more supportive, I need to try too, I thought, trying to be objective. But my efforts seemed futile. "Hi Dad, Mom, long time no see." "Long time no see." "Wow, look how much you've grown, Sebastian." Following our plans, I took Sebastian with me to visit my parents' home. Sebastian was delighted, and so were my parents. "I practiced the game you like, Sebastian. Want to play together?" "Really? I'd love to." "Oh, but I need to do my homework first." How responsible of you. Use the living room, dear. We'll prepare dinner while you finish your homework, they said, prioritizing Sebastian's needs. The contrast with Mark's parents made me feel uneasy. What's wrong? You seem troubled. My mother noticed and said. I took the opportunity to talk to her about everything while Sebastian was with my father. Indeed, we did monopolize your time with the baby, but that was only for about 2 months after he was born, right? Besides, it's wrong to ignore Sebastian's preferences and opinions. Honestly, I'm worried that continuing this marriage might not be best for Sebastian. I understand. Talk it through with Mark, and remember, you can always come back home. We're here for you. I was grateful for her understanding. I knew my father would say the same. That was what I was thinking at the time. I'm home. I heard a voice. And as my mother and I exchanged surprised looks, a woman with a little girl entered. Ivy, is that you? Hey sis, why are you here? It was Ivy, my sister, whom I hadn't seen in 10 years. The little girl, about Sebastian's age, was hiding behind her. Ivy? Why are you here, Ivy? Our parents were visibly shocked by her sudden return. Ivy, while casually placing her bags down, said, I'm tired. Just put these in a room for me, will you? Sebastian, sensing the odd atmosphere, hurried over to me. Ivy, what have you been doing all this time? Well, I got married to the guy I eloped. To summarize her story, she got married to the guy she eloped with and had Hannah. And then she had been living as a family of 3 but returned as a single mother after getting divorced. You're causing trouble again. Don't drag us into your mess. Dad scolded Ivy as she laughed it off. The children, seeing our father's anger, looked scared. Dad, calm down. The kids are frightened. Sorry. Dad said, calming down as he saw the children hiding behind their mothers. Thinking it wasn't good to continue the conversation in front of the children, I asked Sebastian to go to his room for a while. So, Ivy, what do you plan to do now? Mom asked once Sebastian was out of the room. I'll stay here. I can't raise Hannah by myself, Ivy declared. Our eyes then turned to little Hannah. She was watching us warily. She resembled her mother in her cute features. We couldn't bear the thought of turning away my anxious niece because of her mother, so we decided to welcome Ivy for the time being. Thanks. I'll go buy some essentials for living. Wait a minute. But Ivy had already left, leaving us with a subdued Hannah and an awkward atmosphere. I'm Sebastian Smith. What's your name? I'm Hannah Johnson. Nice to meet you. I've got some games, let's play. That's when Sebastian kindly spoke to Hannah, breaking the tension. That helped Hannah to gradually let go of her caution. Following this, Ivy essentially began freeloading at our parents' house. Whenever I called, I'd hear how much she was troubling everyone. Looks like going back to our parents' house isn't an option anymore, I thought, feeling like I had lost my refuge. And now, unable to divorce Mark, I sighed. Sebastian looked up at me, concerned. Why are you sighing? One day, when I sighed, Mark asked what was wrong. I told him about Ivy, and all he said was, huh? His indifference to my worries was evident. He wasn't interested in listening seriously. Why don't you just help your sister out? Mark said to me, obviously not taking the situation seriously, and I couldn't help but feel annoyed. As I was about to retort, the doorbell rang. Ah, there she is. Ivy? I exclaimed as I opened the door, only to find my sister and niece standing there. Apparently, Ivy had gotten our address from our parents and decided to drop by. I've got something urgent to take care of. Please look after Hannah for me, she said, leaving her daughter with us before I could even respond. Wait a minute. Is that the infamous sister? I called out, but she was already gone. And Mark showed up. He watched the whole scene unfold. Yes, that's her. I'll have a word with her when she comes to pick up Hannah. Surprised by his words, I looked at Mark. I decided to let him handle it, though I was a bit surprised by his offer. Even though Ivy abruptly left Hannah with us, it meant we could avoid visiting Mark's parents' house. Sebastian kindly engaged with Hannah, and they started playing together, lightening the mood. I watched them play, wondering why Mark was in such a good mood. "Hey sis. Ivy's here to pick up Hannah. I'll handle it. You stay with Sebastian." As it became dark outside, my sister arrived. Mark, who had taken care of Hannah, returned in an even better mood after dealing with her arrival. "She's quite understanding. Said it was just an emergency this time and she'll be more careful in the future." "Really?" I replied, a bit skeptical, but after that day, Ivy stopped coming to our house. She also seemed to have calmed down at our parents' house. Meanwhile, Mark started working late and going on sudden business trips, saying I've been busy these days. Since Mark had explained to his parents that he was too busy to visit, I didn't have to go there anymore, but I still found it suspicious. It was right around that time. "Next weekend, I have to go on a business trip. It's going to be a bit longer this time." "Oh, really? Take care." Mark was scheduled to go on a business trip for about a week. I said, smiling, though I still had my doubts. "Hey, can I come over?" I called my parents, learning that Ivy was away. I decided to take Sebastian and visit them. Sebastian immediately invited Hannah to play. It seemed that Hannah had warmed up to Sebastian, as she happily accepted his invitation with a smile. "Welcome back. I'm sorry we couldn't be of more help." "It's okay. I never expected Ivy to return like this." "Hey, you too. Look at the TV." Dad suddenly called us over to the television. There was news of a plane crash. "How terrible. Looks like there are a lot of injured." The victims had been rescued, but it seemed most of them were seriously injured. As my mother and I were expressing our concerns, I received a call from an unknown number on my smartphone. "Hello? Yes, Mark Smith is my husband. What? How come? What happened?" "It's Mark. He was on that plane and has been rushed to the hospital." The call was from the hospital. I left Sebastian with my parents and hurried to the hospital. Amidst the plane crash, which resulted in some fatalities, it appeared that Mark had survived but sustained serious injuries. "I'm Mark Smith's wife." "Mrs. Smith, right this way, please." A nurse guided me to his room. There was Mark, lying in the hospital bed. "Mark." "Hey Hazel." Surprisingly, Mark seemed quite lively. I asked for details, and I found out that he had become paralyzed from the waist down. "The worst part is that it was supposed to be a romantic trip with my lover." "Lover?" "Yeah, didn't you realize? The business trips were a lie." His words left me frozen in shock. Mark, without any sign of remorse, continued. "Both she and I are now paralyzed. You're the only one who can take care of us." "What are you talking about?" My concern for him vanished, replaced by disbelief and fading affection. At the same time, the affection for Mark also disappeared. "Please, take care of both of us." I was utterly dismayed by what he said. It was absurd to think that he expected me to take care of his mistress as well. "Why don't you ask your parents?" "What? Make my elderly parents take care of us? You're heartless." "Oh, your mother-in-law would probably be happy to do it, right? And what position are you in to say such things?" Despite being in a position to ask for help, Mark maintained his arrogant demeanor. It made me wonder why I ever fell for him. "Excuse me, coming through." A new bed was wheeled in. I looked over and gasped in shock. "What? Ivy?" It was someone I knew all too well. She had apparently been brought to the same room because she was with Mark. The woman there, Mark's mistress who had been brought in alongside him, was none other than Ivy, my own sister. "You were Mark's lover?" I glared at her as she looked away. Mark, unabashed, explained. Ivy and he had exchanged contacts the day she left Hannah with us. and they had been meeting on his supposed overtime and business trips. Hearing this, my anger reached its peak. "So, you two betrayed us, got into a plane crash, and now you want me to take care of you? You've got some nerve," I said, contemplating what to do next. Mark then spoke up reluctantly. "We're family, so you should help us out, right? Please, big sis," Ivy added, both of them pleading with me. As they clung to me, I decided to speak my mind. I decided it was time to speak my mind. "To you, family seems to be just a convenience. It's not like that. So what do you consider a family, Mark? A father who doesn't actively participate in parenting and forces his son to go places he doesn't want to?" I countered, and Mark fell silent, finally realizing my anger. My gaze then turned to Ivy. "You've always wanted what others had, even going as far as stealing boyfriends, making everyone dislike you. And who's always had to clean up your mess? Me and our parents. Is that your idea of family? Well, at least you two won't be able to cheat anymore. Why don't you just stay together?" I suggested, both of them stunned by my anger. The nurses, who had been observing us, whispered among themselves. "I'll explain things to both families. But from now on, you need to figure things out yourselves," I said and left the room. I then explained the situation to both families. My parents refused to take Ivy back, calling it her just deserts. "It's enough, we can't deal with more," they said. Mark's parents, pitying their son, decided to take him in after some persuasion from his mother. "Oh, and I'm filing for divorce, so don't rely on me." The in-laws pleaded with me to reconsider. It wasn't me who countered him, but Sebastian. "Grandma and Grandpa are the worst. You don't care about Mom at all." His words turned Mark's mother pale. While she tried to make excuses, neither Sebastian nor I were interested in hearing more. Further investigation revealed that Mark had been unfaithful for a long time, starting around when I quit my job. The beginning of it all was around the time I left my job due to the marriage. He had suggested I take maternity leave because it made his affairs easier. The reason he wanted me to quit was that his affair partner worked at the same company, and quitting would prevent the affair from being discovered. Felt quite taken for granted, haven't I? I mused, taking the divorce papers and investigation results to the hospital. Mark and Ivy, now subdued and shunned. They, looked coldly by the nursing staff who were listening to our conversation, were taken aback when I arrived. "File this." "Wait! If you divorce me, the in-laws will take care of you," I replied, ignoring their pleas and proceeding with the divorce. I then returned home with Sebastian. Now, the problem is, left at our family home was Hannah. She was a victim in all this. So I discussed with my parents. Then my parents hired a detective to find Hannah's father. We eventually located Silas, Hannah's father, and arranged a meeting. "Thank you for contacting me. I've always been concerned about my daughter," Silas said. It turns out that he and Ivy had divorced due to her infidelity. He had tried to claim custody, but a mediator believed the child should be with her mother. As a result, Silas lost custody. About Ivy, I explained Ivy's current situation to Silas. He apologized for any inconvenience caused. And to my surprise, he didn't seem like someone who would elope. So, I asked him about it. "Actually, she first approached me using your name," Silas revealed. "What?" I was shocked. Apparently, Ivy had stolen my insurance card to get close to him. Ivy had deceived Silas and made contact with him under false pretenses. Then, after getting pregnant, she demanded they get married. Though I was deceived, I did love Ivy. But more importantly, I still love my daughter, Hannah. I want to take custody of her. I think it's best if you take care of her. And then, I decided to entrust Hannah to Silas's care. When Silas and I returned to my parents' house with Hannah, she greeted him with a big smile and hugged him. "We'll be together from now on. Really? I'm so happy. And they left smiling. With Hannah's safety secured, we decided to move. We thought it best not to stay at my parents' house as Mark and Ivy might come looking for us. A detective told me that they actually visited the house once. I had hired a detective to keep an eye on their movements. After being discharged, Mark and Ivy, pushed in wheelchairs by Mark's parents, had tried to visit my parents' house. And they found it empty, so they ended up at Mark's parents' house. Ivy was allowed to stay there because she was Mark's lover. But the elderly couple struggled to provide care, leading to constant arguments. Well, that's to be expected. Mark, Ivy, and even Mark's parents were all selfish. They always tried to enforce their will. There was a balance only because there were people who would tolerate it. Like me and my parents. We were no longer there, so conflict was inevitable. Well, it's no longer my concern. I had no sympathy for them. However, I needed to ensure everything was finalized legally. So I headed to a lawyer's office. A few days later, Sebastian and I went shopping. I'm so happy to be shopping with you, Mom. He said, his excitement evident due to our recent limited outings. As we enjoyed our time, I was suddenly approached by Ivy. Sis! When my sister called out to me, I was taken aback and froze, surprised. Seeing her struggling to push a wheelchair, I instinctively grabbed Sebastian's hand, ready to flee. Where is Hannah? Isn't Hannah with you? Ivy exclaimed. Given that her first concern was about Hannah, I decided to hear her out. We entered a nearby shop to talk. At first, I was staying at Mark's place, but Ivy was in a vulnerable position in that household. Consequently, she felt marginalized and seemed to be bearing the brunt of everyone's frustrations. Amidst this, she started worrying about Hannah. Once she started worrying about her, even though she knew she didn't have the right to see her, Ivy still longed to at least catch a glimpse of her and managed to escape from her in-laws' house. However, without a clear plan, Ivy was aimlessly wandering around the town. That's when I heard Sebastian's voice. She continued, explaining how it led her to us. She was anxious about not seeing Hannah and had approached us in her panic. Hannah is with Silas now. Ivy froze for a moment. Then she smiled in relief. If she's with Silas, she'll be fine. Have you thought about what you're going to do now? There's someone who's willing to help me. This person was a friend she met during her elopement. Her friend worked at a support facility and arranged for Ivy to stay there for a while. Apparently, she had escaped just before someone was scheduled to pick her up the next day. When I called, I got scolded for acting recklessly, but they said they would still come to pick me up. To Ivy, who said this, I presented a document. This is a list of jobs suitable for wheelchair users. What's this? I know you're going through a tough time, but I will be seeking alimony. I see you're remorseful, so I'll allow installment payments. Find yourself a job. Okay, I'm sorry. After her friend arrived, Ivy left with the friend. I thought maybe she could still turn her life around. Sorry for the delay. Let's go shopping, I said to Sebastian, and we left the shop. As we were leaving, we ran into Mark. His parents were nearby, possibly searching for Ivy, and stumbled upon us instead. What do you want? Come on, let's get back together. A family should be together, right? Stop joking. I have no intention of going back to you. Unlike my sister, Mark called out to me out of self-preservation. Disappointed by his self-serving attitude, I glared at him. I expect a lump sum for the alimony and child support. I'm embarrassed that you're my dad. Faced with our cold attitude, Mark froze. We turned our backs on him and left. In comparison, Ivy seems better, I thought as Sebastian and I focused on our shopping. Hazel! Sebastian! Mark called out, but his voice no longer reached me. Later, with the help of a lawyer, I filed for alimony against both of them. Ivy began to pay the alimony. Apparently, she was struggling with a new life and an unfamiliar job. She said she received only minimal help from the friend she had mentioned. I remember Ivy used to be so sweet and genuine when she was little. Perhaps being pushed to her limits, she had reverted somewhat to her former self. On the other hand, Mark, who was faced with a lump sum alimony demand, also had a hard time. He eventually had to sell his parents' house and use all of their retirement funds to pay the lump sum alimony I demanded. Am I too harsh? After all, he was paralyzed from the waist down. You don't need to worry about it. Right. You simply claimed your rightful dues. My parents reassured me, sensing my slight guilt over the situation. Hannah, now living with Silas, seemed to be happy. According to Silas, she was fond of Sebastian, who had been kind to her. This news brought a smile to my face. Sometime later, I received a letter from Silas. It contained excerpts from a letter Ivy had written to him. I always wanted to be like my big sister. But I realized I could never be her, leading me to self-destructive choices. However, I truly fell in love with you, Silas, and genuinely love Hannah. The letter ended with, I don't deserve to see Hannah or my sister ever again. It seemed that Ivy would not appear before me again. It was her self-imposed punishment. Mom, can I go to my friend's house today? Sure, but make sure you come back before it's late. Even in our new home, Sebastian was making friends and enjoying school. Let's continue to live a peaceful life with our cherished family. With these thoughts in mind, I watched Sebastian energetically run off. Just as construction began on our new home, my husband lost his job. He had promised to pay half of the mortgage even if he had to work part-time, but he couldn't find another job and didn't even work part-time. When our new home was completed, he suddenly came up with a ridiculous idea. I've decided to give this house as a wedding present to my adorable niece. We can always buy another house. If you disagree with me, let's get divorced right away. Huh? What does he mean? I was shocked, but I knew his secret, so I was ready to happily agree to a divorce if that's what he wanted. Smugly thinking he had his way, my husband quickly filed for divorce. Then he started asking about the division of property. When I threatened to reveal his secret, his attitude changed dramatically. With the help of a certain person, his plan took an unexpected turn, leading to an unbelievable situation. We had been married for 3 years. Next year, I will turn 30, and my husband, Daniel, will be in his mid-30s. We discussed whether to have children. Bearing a child requires physical strength, and one cannot always maintain their current health. I wanted to have a child before my mid-30s and discussed this with Daniel. If he felt it was unnecessary to force ourselves to have a child, I was okay with that. However, Daniel said he also wanted a child, but our current home was too small for a family. He suggested considering buying our own home. Raising a child and owning a home would cost a lot, not to mention a mortgage of nearly 30 years. By then, Daniel would be in his mid-60s, likely retiring. I didn't want our child to struggle because of a mortgage. My mother worked full-time while raising me and doing household chores. She worked until retirement, supporting my father and me. I always respected her and decided to work while maintaining a household. With this in mind, I was determined to realistically plan for our own home. We chose a builder and our home plan was on track. Fortunately, we had savings, so we decided to pay a large down payment to reduce future mortgage troubles. Just as things were coming together, Daniel's company went bankrupt, and he lost his job without any severance pay. I asked if there were any signs of the company failing, but he snapped back, saying he couldn't have known as he wasn't a senior executive. One morning, he went to work only to find the office closed with a notice. It said the company had gone bankrupt the day before. It was a small company, and apparently, the executives had fled in the night, leaving no severance pay or salary for that month. I suggested putting the house plan on hold, considering our uncertain future. However, Daniel insisted we continue since we had already made plans. He promised to find a new job without being picky and convinced me to put the plan on hold temporarily. I thought he would find a job quickly if he wasn't choosy. I decided to continue with our plan once he secured employment. Daniel started visiting the employment office and searching for jobs online. He even found a temporary part-time job, although it was on a call-in basis. Even so, it was a temp job on a call-in basis, so he never knew when he'd be working. His actions and commitment to pay the mortgage together made me feel his determination. Since my income was stable and we could manage without his help for the time being, I decided to go ahead with our house plan. Up to this point, you might think Daniel was a very sincere husband. However, he had an odd obsession. Daniel has an older sister, who had a child, Mia, at a young age. Becoming an uncle at a young age, Daniel adored Mia immensely. My sister-in-law lived far away due to my brother-in-law's job transfer, so we didn't see them often. But my husband, Daniel, would send gifts and a lot of cash to his niece, for allowance or as Christmas gift, sometimes 5 times the usual amount. I even opposed him once when he wanted to give $2,000 for Christmas gift, arguing it was too much even for his beloved niece. When sending gifts to his niece, who lives far away, we usually mail them. But after Daniel reported spending money to send something to her, I never heard any word of thanks from my sister-in-law, which was frustrating. I questioned my husband's nerve when I heard that he had given his niece an expensive gift without regard for the family budget, even when unplanned expenses came up at one point. Since then, I've often been frustrated with his excessive fondness for his niece. Now that Daniel is unemployed, thankfully, he doesn't seem to be dipping into our savings for his niece's sake. However, his time away from home, supposedly job hunting, has significantly increased. In fact, he leaves the house earlier and returns later than he did when he was working. I wondered if job centers were open that late. He said he was attending information sessions and networking. It's great he's eager about job hunting, but he's been careless about our new home construction, leaving everything to me. He arrogantly told me to handle all the paperwork, though he wanted his name on the deed. I gently reminded him to show some interest in our home. He sighed, saying he was too tired from job hunting and asked me to handle it. I was tired too, juggling work, the new home, and household chores, so I didn't argue to avoid a fight. Later, I worried he might say I should pay the mortgage since I made all the decisions. When I brought up the mortgage payments, Daniel said he didn't want to dip into his personal savings until he found a job. He said it was to avoid burdening me, but I thought we should focus on the present rather than potential emergencies. Despite my explanations, Daniel insisted on not using his savings and wanted me to handle the mortgage for now. Since his suggestion was too convenient for him and differed from our original agreement, I asked him to sign a loan agreement, acknowledging he was borrowing money from me for his share of the mortgage during this period. He complained but reluctantly agreed, fearing I might probe deeper into his job hunting progress. In response, Daniel continued to complain, but he reluctantly accepted, perhaps realizing that it would be troublesome if I started probing into his job hunting situation. We agreed that he would repay half of the mortgage payments I made during this period once he was reemployed. I got his signature and stored the document where he wouldn't find it. Despite our initial agreement, there were several instances of him failing to uphold his promises. Daniel said he'd find a job quickly without being picky, but he hadn't reemployed as our new home neared completion. He even turned down a few temp job offers, making excuses. I didn't want to support a husband who made no effort to find work. Our arguments increased as I urged him to find a job. In the meantime, the new house was finally finished and ready to move into. But living with him, let alone moving, seemed difficult under the current circumstances. I had gathered various information since Daniel was laid off. There are many things I want to confirm and say, including the fact that he still hasn't found a job. As usual, I called out to Daniel as he was leaving for the job center. I asked him to spend the day with me, saying we needed to have a serious talk. He tried to escape, prioritizing job hunting and suggesting we talk another day. I insisted, saying missing one day at the job center wouldn't be a problem. Then, he said something shocking. Nagging women aren't attractive, you know? What? Actually, I have something to tell you too. I thought I'd wait, but it's good news, so why not now? My niece is getting married. So, I've decided to give her our new house as a present. Let's split the mortgage and keep paying as we are. What? I was already appalled by his excessive love and financial sense towards his niece, but gifting her a whole house? Why would he make such a big decision without telling me? Hearing about his niece getting married was news to me. I couldn't believe he thought he could go through with such a plan without discussing it with me. When I pressed him, Daniel suggested divorce if I didn't like it. He was the one who initiated the house building while unemployed and not making any progress. Yet, he kept making uncertain promises about work. His plausible words didn't match his actions. I was so astounded by his behavior that I laughed. That's why I wasn't surprised when he made the absurd suggestion to gift our house to his niece. It must be related to that issue. Despite my curiosity about his response, I bombarded him with questions. Are you serious? You're unemployed, and you want to gift a house with a remaining mortgage to your niece? Do you think she would be happy with that? I wondered how he could think of giving away a house we're paying a 30-year mortgage on. It's not a good omen to gift a house with an unpaid mortgage. It's like sending troubles. I also pressed him about his plans for having children since we bought the house for our expanding family. Daniel responded defiantly to my questions. He said he doesn't mind getting divorce. He used the threat of divorce to avoid discussing his thoughts. It was as if we weren't even the same people anymore. Our conversation just wasn't working. I had a lot to discuss, but it seemed he was far more unreasonable than I thought. I had already planned to initiate divorce, so I easily accepted his suggestion. I told him I was fine with divorcing and leaving the house, as long as he listened to my demands. Daniel agreed to follow my instructions if I allowed the divorce and left the house. So, I said it's okay to file for divorce first, but I wanted to settle the property division after it was official. I also told him that I needed to hurry with my preparations to live alone, so I asked him to wait until things settled down. Daniel agreed to follow my lead if he could file for divorce immediately. In truth, I wanted time to prepare for something important without him knowing. I said this to buy myself time to prepare for living alone without him finding out. After the divorce and finishing what I needed, I was waiting for the right time to contact Daniel. Then, either out of impatience or realization, he contacted me first. What's going on? Why is our new house listed for sale? It's supposed to be a gift for my niece, and it's our joint property. If you do something like this without my consent, I won't pay the mortgage. Then, Daniel called, complaining about me selling our jointly owned house without telling him. He was furious and wouldn't listen to me. I waited for him to calm down before responding. I knew you were trying to push the payments onto me. Did you really think it was still in joint names? You were so confident about divorce, I made sure to check everything before agreeing. When he asked to keep it in joint names, it indeed was. But, feeling distrustful towards my husband who was somehow making excuses to push the mortgage payments onto me alone, I suspected that eventually, he would refuse to pay any money at all, claiming the house as his own. So I changed the ownership. As expected, when the house was completed, Daniel started acting strangely. He insisted on gifting the house to his niece, believing his true intentions were still hidden. So, I paid off the mortgage in full with all my assets. Actually, when my parents learned we were building a house, they sold some land inherited from my grandfather and gave me the cash, advising me to use it for the payment. My parents always believed in paying for expensive items in full. My parents always said it wasn't wise to easily commit to a mortgage, given its uncertain future. That's why, when we were building our house, they provided financial assistance so we could pay in full without a loan. I could have followed my parents' advice, but just as I was about to discuss this, Daniel lost his job. I thought if he knew about this money, he would become even more irresponsible, so I kept quiet. Also, if I paid in full, I felt Daniel, with his attitude, would likely never repay me. I didn't want to trample on my parents' kindness by revealing this. Daniel was furious when he found out I had changed the house's ownership without his knowledge. He accused me of breaking our promise to keep the house. The house is still there, isn't it? It's not demolished, it's perfectly habitable. It's still existing, even if in someone else's hands, so you have no grounds to complain. If you really want it, you can buy it back. It's my prerogative what I do with the house I paid for in full. Of course, I could have chosen to live in that house. But living in a home planned with my estranged husband felt wrong. When Daniel realized I had sold the house, he angrily said I shouldn't make excuses. He then started insisting he had a right to part of the money from the sale as it was marital property. He demanded an immediate partial payment, saying we'd settle the exact amount later. I told him we should meet to discuss this and other matters. I arrived at the designated place first and waited for Daniel. Shortly after, when Daniel arrived at the designated place, he was about to say something upon seeing me. I showed him something before he could speak, and he was stunned into silence and looked at it carefully. What I showed him was the result of a private investigator's surveillance. It revealed his infidelity. There were enlarged photos of him kissing another woman on the street. There were photos of him dining at fancy restaurants and entering a hotel. According to the report, Daniel did job hunt for a few days after losing his job, but people around his mistress said they met around the time our house construction began, and they were seeing each other almost daily. Daniel had been playing the sympathy card with her from the start, claiming to be single and considering marriage, but struggling to find a job due to the recession. He wasn't just seeking sympathy, he was financially exploiting her, asking for money and gifts under the pretense of marriage. His actions, demanding money and gifts under the pretense of marriage, were akin to those of a marriage scammer. Knowing this made me feel sick. His sudden insistence on divorce seemed like he had had enough of everything. My talks about the mortgage, his uncooperative attitude, he probably got tired every time I brought these up. It seemed he planned to switch to his mistress, who was more sympathetic and compliant than me. The story about gifting the house to his niece was just an excuse to get a divorce. I realized his intention to use my refusal as a reason for divorce right away. He thought he was manipulating me, but in reality, I was the one in control. I had hired a private investigator when I noticed Daniel's strange behavior and knew about his affair. The excuse about gifting the house was unexpected, but I had already decided on divorce once I learned of his infidelity. What I wanted to discuss before moving into the new house was this matter. Initially, I planned to confront him about the affair and proceed with the divorce, but seeing his irrational behavior made me realize he was not someone I could reason with. So, I decided to let him think he had his way while I strategized in the background. Holding all the evidence, I confronted him. I have solid evidence of your affair. You can't escape this. I will demand alimony from you. You knew and kept quiet? What kind of woman stays silent knowing her husband is cheating? You're no good. Loving? You were the one betraying me, weren't you? When Daniel started talking about being a loving husband, I couldn't help but burst into derisive laughter. As I countered his statement, he hesitated for a moment, then as if struck by a brilliant idea, he again insisted on his right to property division. At that point, I made a call to my father-in-law as my final card. I informed him that Daniel was demanding a share of the property. Daniel started to rant about why I needed to involve his father, but he stopped abruptly when I told him his father wanted to speak with him. I put the phone on speaker, and Daniel heard every word of his father's scolding. His father berated him for his behavior, asking what a man over 30 was doing, and whether he wasn't embarrassed by his infidelity and the ensuing family breakdown. Furthermore, he ridiculed the idea of Daniel asking for property division after causing such chaos. Daniel has always had a bad relationship with his father-in-law, unable to defy him since childhood. His father-in-law detests dishonesty and particularly loathes those who harm or deceive others. After Daniel brought up divorce, I first consulted with my father-in-law. I asked for help only if I couldn't resolve things myself. My father-in-law assured me he would deal with Daniel, who had strayed into infidelity. I had many things to say to Daniel, who had betrayed me. If my father-in-law intervened too soon, Daniel might have fled. So, I kept silent about consulting with him. Part of the reason I wanted to delay things after the divorce was to arrange a meeting with my father-in-law without Daniel knowing. I also needed to ensure that Daniel didn't find out about the sale of the house. Additionally, I wanted to clarify Daniel's relationship with his niece. I called his sister in front of his father and asked her if his niece had ever received expensive gifts, allowances, or holiday money from Daniel. His niece said she had never received anything substantial from Daniel. His sister even mentioned that when his niece was young, Daniel attended her birthday parties without bringing any gifts. He gave only a cheap birthday card. I also asked about his niece's supposed marriage plans. It turns out that his niece, whom he claimed to be dating, had no plans for marriage, and she was puzzled about where the story even originated. She had never expressed a desire for a house, and in fact, would find it burdensome and troubling if offered. Both my sister-in-law and father-in-law were surprised to hear about Daniel's alleged fondness for his niece. So, where did all the money Daniel claimed to spend on his niece go? His sister then provided valuable information. When Daniel was around 20, his father was away on a work assignment. And Daniel got caught up in a police raid at an illegal casino. Daniel was terrified of his father finding out about his encounter with the police. Daniel begged his mother, who picked him up from the police, to keep it a secret. Under the condition of full confession, it came out that Daniel had been taking valuables from the family storage to fund his gambling addiction. Although he had promised to quit, his gambling seemed pathological, and it was doubtful he had stopped. Hearing this, my father-in-law checked the storage against the inventory and found several items missing. He confronted Daniel about his gambling, accusing him of using his niece as a cover for his addiction. "You're still gambling, using your niece as a cover, aren't you? It's quite a position for an unemployed man to be gambling. The money from the property division isn't for your bets." He ordered Daniel to return home for a serious talk, saying he would set him straight. Unable to defy his father, Daniel turned pale, despairing, and conceded he didn't need the property division and would pay alimony. Afterwards, I received the official documents prepared by the lawyer my father-in-law had arranged for me, stating that Daniel had renounced his claim to the property division. I gained all the shared assets. Additionally, through my father-in-law's consideration, I received a larger-than-average lump sum of alimony from Daniel. At one point, I admittedly felt anger towards Daniel's mistress. However, my feelings changed when I investigated her during the process of Daniel's infidelity investigation. She believed Daniel was single and struggling financially and had been giving him money despite her own tight financial situation. I realized she was also a victim, used by Daniel. Even though she was deceived, she tearfully apologized for disrupting my family. And she offered to pay me compensation, though it was a small amount. I declined her money, appreciating her gesture enough. I also advised her that she could likely claim alimony from Daniel. I told his promises of marriage and demanding gifts and money amounted to fraud, and then she promptly took action upon this advice. When she confronted Daniel at his parents' house, accusing him of deception for marriage, my father-in-law became furiously angry. He told her she could file a police report and instructed Daniel to turn himself in immediately, causing a huge commotion. Daniel begged for mercy from both his mistress and father-in-law, promising to repay all the money he had swindled from her. Daniel used up all of his meager savings to pay off the mistress's alimony and reimburse her for the gifts, leaving him completely broke. My recently retired father-in-law, having plenty of time, closely monitored Daniel. The supervision was so strict that he even followed Daniel to the bathroom and scheduled every minute of his day. Daniel was taken to the job center under his father's escort and was constantly pressured to find a job quickly. Unable to endure this prison-like existence at home, Daniel attempted to escape while his father was asleep. Desperate and penniless, he couldn't bear the hunger and returned to his father-in-law's house within 2 days. Following this, his father, disappointed and exasperated, disowned Daniel for lacking backbone, whether in staying home or fleeing. Daniel, left with nothing but the clothes on his back, broke into his parents' storeroom in desperation, repeating his past actions of stealing valuable antiques. However, his father, aware of Daniel's past thefts from the storeroom, had now secured it properly. The installation of security cameras and a contract with a security firm meant that Daniel was quickly caught and faced the police for the second time. With his mother no longer alive to help, and his sister furious about using her daughter as a pretext, no one was willing to bail him out. My father-in-law refused to take him back, suggesting he must learn his lesson in jail. Of course, I refused to help, stating that he was now a stranger to me. As for me, with the house sold and the money in hand, I'm considering investing in some much-needed personal rejuvenation. I've rented a top-floor apartment in a building I've always wanted to live in. Now, I plan to enjoy the view, savor delicious food, and take some time to care for myself after these tumultuous years with Daniel. A life without children is miserable, huh? My daughter is adorable and a genius. Cohen Kirby said with a grin on his face, causing my insides to boil with rage. It was like he had forgotten all about how he had treated me in the past, casually striking up this conversation and then saying this. I couldn't help but feel furious. However, I reminded myself of the situation I was in and managed to suppress my anger. Carefully maintaining a cheerful appearance, I decided to respond to Cohen. Even if he got mad, it wouldn't come close to what I had endured. I called my daughter, Sarah, who was a little distance away, and proudly said, "Well, let me introduce my daughter then." I probably had the smile I envisioned on my face. As I showed that to Cohen, I hugged Sarah, who had run over to me. Huh? Cohen looked at us with a dumbfounded expression, his mouth agape in surprise. He couldn't accept the reality of the woman he had always looked down upon. Jolie, who had been smirking by Cohen's side until then, seemed unable to hide her shock either. Ignoring them, I turned to talk to Sarah. My name is Kyrie Allen, a 51-year-old businesswoman. Whenever I mention that my daughter is 12 years old, people are usually surprised. Yes, I married late, but there's a story behind that. Actually, I'm divorced, and I didn't have any children from that marriage. I met my ex-husband, Cohen Kirby, in a blind date. A friend of mine, who was worried about my perpetual workaholism and unwillingness to get married, arranged a party for me. That's where Cohen took a liking to me and started pursuing me intensely. That said, I still had no intention of doing so at first, and I was still cowed by Cohen's favors. But he was so persistent that I eventually warmed up to the idea. As a result, Cohen and I started dating and soon got married. Once married, Cohen, who was very keen on having children, was serious about trying to conceive. However, being in my late 30s then, I felt an immense pressure. Whether it was due to that or not, we had trouble conceiving. Gradually, Cohen's attitude toward me cooled, eventually turning contemptuous. "What's up, infertile? Did you pick up the cleaning I asked about before?" He began referring to me as infertile and treating me like a servant. It was incredibly frustrating, and I desperately looked for a solution. I even went to the hospital, fearing the worst, but all the tests showed that I was perfectly healthy. In fact, the doctor even suggested that stress might be causing it, leaving me feeling utterly helpless and downhearted. I tried everything, watching my diet, taking supplements. Despite all efforts, I still couldn't get pregnant. Wondering if the problem might not be mine, I suggested to Cohen Kirby that he should get tested. "Hey, Cohen." I went to the doctor, and they found nothing wrong with me. "So, there might be a chance that, it could be you." "I think you should get tested," I said. Cohen's face turned red with anger immediately. "What? You're saying something's wrong with me? It's just you who can't get pregnant, don't you dare doubt me." "But there's nothing wrong with me, and I've been undergoing treatment for so long. If we can't have kids, it only makes sense that the issue might be with you." "That's impossible. I'm always fine, it has to be your fault, you're the only one to blame." Cohen stubbornly refused to consider my suggestion, insisting the problem was mine. At first, I argued back, but constant accusations wore me down. Finally, one of Cohen's remarks broke me completely. "What's the point of you being a woman if you can't even have kids?" He said it so dismissively that I was left speechless. Not because I agreed with him, but because I was shocked by the extent of his cruelty. I managed the house and supported Cohen, who also worked, as best as I could. Yet, just because I couldn't bear children, he dismissed me entirely. My spirit broken, I couldn't bring myself to ask him to get tested again. The thought of hearing those same harsh words made me too afraid to speak up. Sensing this, Cohen began ordering me around even more. I'm beat. I don't want the usual beer today, I'm craving that import one they sell at the liquor store downtown. Hey, you, since you're obviously not busy being infertile, go get it for me, now. He grew more audacious, treating me like a mere errand runner, laughing smugly. Any hint of resistance from me was met with even more vile words. I endured, day after day, without a thought of anything else. You'd think I'd have left him by now, right? But being a latecomer to marriage, I feared I'd never marry again if I left this one. Plus, I was somehow convinced that divorce was shameful, making it hard for me to take that step. So, time just passed, and I turned 38, when things suddenly took a dramatic turn. At that time, I was still working and enduring the infertility snoring that continued almost daily. Come on, you should know what I don't like by now. How can you expect me to eat such awful food? This is exactly why you're... That day, I couldn't hold back anymore and snapped back. What does food have to do with not having kids? I can't stand it anymore. Enough is enough, I exclaimed. Cohen leaped up, yelling at me fiercely. What's with that attitude? You can't even fulfill your role as a woman, and you dare complain to me when I get home from work. His unreasonable argument infuriated me. What role as a woman? If that means having kids, then you share the responsibility. I got tested, and there's nothing wrong with me. But you refuse to get tested, avoiding your responsibility. And yet, you have the nerve to complain only to me. It's just unfair. Cohen Kirby seemed a bit flustered by my rare rebuttal. But he quickly regained his composure and started hurling insults again. Why are you so stubborn? If it were her, she'd immediately reflect and apologize in this situation. His words stopped me in my tracks. Before I could even ask who her was, Cohen's expression changed to one of regret. And he quickly turned away, leaving the house without another word. He didn't come home that day, and I grew increasingly suspicious. From his tone, it was clear there was another woman in the picture. This meant he was cheating, which could potentially lead to a divorce. Not because I couldn't have children, but because of Cohen's infidelity. With this in mind, I acted quickly. I searched the internet for a nearby private investigator and hired them to look into Cohen's recent suspicious behavior and his mistress. A few weeks later, the investigator's report arrived. During this time, Cohen came home but avoided eye contact with me. He even stopped the verbal abuse. It was a surprising and somewhat more comfortable turn of events that made me regret not taking action sooner. I should have to do it. As these thoughts crossed my mind, I looked through the report. It confirmed Cohen's infidelity and included evidence and details about his mistress. Her name was Jolie. A 23-year-old, obviously much younger than both Cohen and me. They apparently started seeing each other right after I first suggested Cohen get tested. It meant this affair had been going on for years. Filled with sudden rage of finding it out, I decided to proceed with a divorce. While I prepared, Cohen was surprisingly calm. It was allowing me to make steady progress. Finally, I decided to confront Cohen about the divorce. Cohen, we need to talk. It's not about the test, it's something more important, I said as he just came home from work, making a displeased face. What now? I've got something to tell you too. Make it quick, he said, looking bored but somewhat attentive while fiddling with his phone. Before he could change his mind, I quickly presented him with the investigator's report. You're cheating, Cohen. I've had it thoroughly investigated, so there's no escaping this. Between the child issue and your infidelity, I can't take it anymore. I want a divorce, I said, thrusting the report and a partially filled-in divorce papers at him as a sign of my will. Instead of being flustered, Cohen smirked and took the divorce papers from my hand. Well, aren't you prepared? Such perfect timing almost makes me question your precognitive abilities, he remarked while operating his phone. Suddenly, with a click, the front door opened. Hello there, excuse my intrusion. Oh, nice to meet you. I'm Jolie, the one who's gonna marry Cohen soon. The person who entered through the front door was the same one in the photos enclosed with the private investigator's report. Jolie, who looked even younger and cuter in person than in the photos, greeted me with a smirk. Today was actually the day I planned to introduce you to her. And to think you'd prepare the divorce papers for me, I didn't see that coming. If you had been this considerate all along, maybe I would have stuck around, but it's too late now. Cohen said half-jokingly, taking the divorce papers and walking into the living room. I was too shocked to grasp the situation and stood there, frozen. Soon, Cohen emerged from the living room with the divorce papers filled out. He handed them to me with a sly smile, saying, "This sure saves a lot of trouble. We're no longer husband and wife, so leave now. Jolie's pregnant, and I want her to have as little stress as possible." Faced with Jolie's and Cohen's malicious grins, I lost my composure. Snatching the divorce papers from Cohen, I ran to my room. I grabbed my already packed bags and left the house without a word. Fast forward 13 years. I had come to see how the project I was involved in had been completed. My job is as a professional consultant, and this time I was tasked with designing an apartment building that would be disaster-resistant and children-friendly. After Cohen introduced me to Jolie, I took refuge in a nearby business hotel. I waited until dawn to submit the divorce papers to the city hall, then moved from hotel to hotel. After that, I was finally settling into an apartment and focusing on my career. Divorcing Cohen seemed to lighten my spirits, and my work progressed smoothly. I got lucky with business opportunities and expanded my network. This revitalization led to my appointment as the project leader for this urban development, a long endeavor that had finally come to fruition. There was a small celebration at the site, crowded with many people. Then, a familiar, unpleasant voice caught my ear. "Hey, long time no see. Still all alone, huh? I came here to buy one of these condos for my family of 3. not that it matters to you. I regretfully turned towards the voice. I saw Cohen, Julie. And also there were their daughter, who must have been in Julie's womb back then. A life without children is miserable, huh? My daughter is adorable and a genius. Cohen said with a grin, causing my blood to boil. He had easily struck up a conversation as if he'd forgotten all the past. past mistreatment. I couldn't help but feel furious. However, I reminded myself of my current situation and managed to suppress my anger. Carefully maintaining a cheerful appearance, I decided to respond to Cohen. Even if he got mad, it wouldn't compare to what I had endured. I called my daughter, who was a little distance away, and proudly said, "Well, let me introduce my daughter then." I probably had the smile I envisioned on my face. As I flaunted my smile to Cohen Kirby, Sarah ran up to me, and I embraced her. "Huh?" Cohen looked at us, his mouth agape in surprise. Clearly unable to accept the reality of the situation, especially from someone he had looked down upon for so long. Julie, who had been smirking beside Cohen until then, also seemed unable to hide her shock. Ignoring them, I turned to talk to Sarah. "Did you find a good spot for the shoot?" I asked. Sarah beamed and nodded. "I want to shoot in front of the flower bed you were so particular about." She pointed to the flower bed and grabbed the equipment next to me, dashing toward it. As I watched her spirited back, Julie screamed in disbelief. "Is that Sarah from the popular video sharing site? Why is she calling you Mom?" Her words caught the attention of Cohen and Julie's daughter, Yvonne. "That's really her. Wow, I'm meeting the real deal for the first time. Hey, ma'am, can I get her autograph?" "That's a great idea, Yvonne. You really are a genius." Their arrogant remarks were so typical of them as a family. I shrugged my shoulders in resignation and firmly refused. "Sorry, but no. Sarah posts videos because she enjoys filming and editing, not because she wants to be famous. Sure, she's become well known, but that's not her goal." "But why not?" "It doesn't cost anything. Besides, my daughter is a genius." A combination of a celebrity and a genius makes for great content. Annoyed yet curious, I asked Cohen what made his daughter a genius. "All I've seen is her brash and insensitive behavior." "Where's the genius in that?" "How dare you? Yvonne is a bright student preparing for a prestigious middle school. She's going to be someone big." I wished for a concrete example of Yvonne's genius. But Jolie's claims lacked specifics, making me sigh in frustration. Cohen, displeased with my reaction, began bragging more about Yvonne. "Yvonne is so talented, she never sticks to anything for long. She masters everything too quickly and then gets bored. It's tough having a genius for a child." Hearing this far from impressive boast, I grew tired of the conversation. Without responding much to Cohen's bragging, I moved towards where Sarah was filming. I could hear Cohen and his family still talking behind me, but I ignored them and called out to Sarah. "How's the shooting going, Sarah? Let's go to the cafe when you're done." Many people had gathered around Sarah, intrigued by her filming. Some recognized her as Sarah from the videos, creating a lively scene. "I just need to shoot the ending, then I'm done. Just a little longer," she replied cheerfully, waving to the people around her before starting to film the final scene. "Hey, Sarah! Let me be in the video with you." At an incredibly inopportune moment, Yvonne tried to interrupt the shoot. Noticing Yvonne's interruption, Sarah smiled at her and then resumed filming. After completing the shoot, Sarah was surrounded by onlookers. Many, like Yvonne, asked for her autograph, but Sarah politely declined each request. Instead, she engaged in friendly conversations with those who had approached her. Sarah continued her activities because she found joy in them, not because she sought fame. While she had indeed become famous, she never bragged about it. Autographs were not something she had even considered. So she chose to connect with her fans through conversation instead. When Yvonne had interrupted earlier, Sarah must have been annoyed. Sarah hid her feelings and gently refused. But I wondered if Yvonne understood that. When Sarah was about to leave, Yvonne, evidently not grasping Sarah's intentions, approached her. "Great job on the shoot. Now, how about filming with me next time?" Seeing Sarah's dumbfounded look, I couldn't stay out of it any longer. "I'm sorry, but Sarah doesn't do collaborations." That smile earlier was just being polite to you for interrupting her shoot. What, is that just lip service? Learning such things at a young age, you're not raising her right. Jolie crossed her arms and looked down on Sarah. Sarah briefly stiffened but remained silent, not retorting. Feeling victorious, Jolie snorted and pressed on. Are you saying Yvonne isn't worthy of filming with you? You know, Yvonne is a genius who can do anything. It could actually boost your popularity. Maybe you should learn to read the room better. Sarah looked at me, unsure how to respond. I sighed and confronted Jolie. Enough already. You keep calling your daughter a genius, but I haven't seen a single concrete example. Being awarded isn't the only mark of greatness, but do you have any substantial achievements to brag about? The onlookers who had been listening to our conversation seemed to agree with me. Jolie looked bitter under the pressure of their words, but Yvonne didn't seem to care. Instead, she proudly started listing her accomplishments. I received a certificate at my piano recital for doing well in practice. And at my dance school, I got one for being able to dance a whole song. Plus, I've been awarded for perfect attendance at school. I've been recognized a lot, you know. Considering Sarah's age, Yvonne must be around the same age. Sarah was 12 years old, so probably Yvonne was also a middle schooler. Her claims felt somewhat trivial for her age. Unaware of the awkwardness, Yvonne looked at us expectantly for praise. I exchanged a helpless glance with Sarah, and we could only make troubled faces. The people around us reacted similarly, with some even bursting into laughter. Finally sensing the mood, Jolie awkwardly changed the topic. So, speaking of your activities, how much do you earn? I doubt it's enough to afford a condo here, right? Caught off guard by her desperate question, I decided to respond. Thankfully, Sarah's videos are quite popular on the video sharing site. She does earn money, but we're saving it for her future. We spend some on necessary equipment for filming. While this condominium is attractive, we don't need it as we already have our own home. Besides, I designed this place, so the success fee was substantial. My current husband runs a company, and combining our incomes, moving here wouldn't be a bad idea. I preemptively answered all the questions Jolie might have wanted to ask. As expected, she grimaced, glaring at Sarah and me. Cohen, having heard my explanation, seemed unable to argue back. However, Jolie, ever cunning, tried to butter me up despite her previously hostile attitude. So, you built this place? Then you could get us a spot here, right? Our kids are about the same age. Can't you speak up for us out of pity? I had no intention of agreeing to such a request. As I was about to firmly decline, Yvonne, misunderstanding the situation, chimed in with sparkling eyes. We can live in this condo if we ask you? Hey, ma'am. We want to live here. Please help us out. I sighed, exasperated. And I decided to set them straight. I'm sorry, but I can't guarantee you can live here. I might be able to refer you to the management company using my contacts, but there's a screening process. They'll check things like your job, income, potential for the future, and so on. I don't control the screening, so it's not certain you'll get in. It's up to you to make it happen. Jolie clicked her tongue upon hearing this, while Yvonne didn't seem to fully grasp the situation. Cohen then butted in, demanding the impossible. Our daughter is asking, so make it happen. If you have the connections from building this place, get us through the screening. People around us started whispering at Cohen's unreasonable demands. I felt a headache coming on, wondering how to explain this obvious point. I can't interfere with the screening process, that's beyond my control. If you want to live here, overcome the challenge on your own merits. At this, Cohen suddenly lost his temper. He began yanking flowers from a nearby bed and throwing them at me. I shielded Sarah from being hit, trying to calm Cohen down. But then, Jolie and Yvonne, following Cohen's lead, started doing the same. Jolie hurled insults and flowers at us, and Yvonne spewed verbal abuse at Sarah. I focused on protecting Sarah, but luckily, people around us intervened. Still, Cohen and his family continued their rampage, throwing anything they could find. Julie picked up a stone and raised her arm. I grabbed her to stop her but was shoved into the flower bed, hitting my head. The surrounding crowd became even more agitated and tried harder to stop them. However, the three individuals, who continued to behave violently in a fit of rage, were soon restrained. It's unclear who made the call, but the police arrived after hearing about the commotion. "Who called the cops?" Cohen shouted as the officers restrained him, but no one responded. Julie, also being subdued by the police, tried to find out who had reported them. Yvonne stopped her tantrum but began crying as she watched her parents being detained. The area, which had been chaotic, suddenly quieted down when an officer's voice rang out. "Caught red-handed on suspicion of obstruction of justice." At these words, the commotion ceased in an instant. Cohen, who had caused the commotion, was apprehended by the police for his aggressive behavior. Holding my head and trying to comfort a tearful Sarah, I watched as he was taken away. At the same time, Julie and Yvonne were also escorted to the police station. All three of them were put into a police car and driven away, disappearing from view. Despite the chaos they had caused, their swift removal by the police left me feeling somewhat relieved. But seeing Sarah on the verge of tears, yet still concerned for me, brought me back to reality. "Mom, you're hurt. Should we go to the hospital? Otherwise, you might." The commotion had overwhelmed Sarah, and she finally broke down crying. Hugging her, I apologized for involving her in such a situation. People around us expressed their concern. But I assured them I was fine, especially since Sarah was unharmed. When the sound of an ambulance siren approached, it seemed someone had called for medical assistance. The ambulance arrived, and alongside the police, I was taken in for treatment with Sarah by my side. As I boarded the ambulance, I took one last look at the damaged flower bed. The construction of the large condominium had inevitably created a sense of oppression. I had wanted to alleviate that by setting up a park within the grounds and placing a flower bed there. I hoped that the park would become a place of relaxation and conversation. The park where I first met my current husband had brought me much happiness. Taking a break from work, I had been admiring the flowers in the park when he approached me. From there, I started talking to my current husband, who worked near that park, and we became close. Our relationship grew from occasional lunchtime meetings to dinners, and eventually, we got married. Later, we were blessed with our daughter Sarah, despite it being a late pregnancy. That park, with its flower beds, had brought so much joy into my life. So, I wanted the project I was involved in to offer similar opportunities for happiness. The result of that effort was the flower bed. Seeing the flower bed destroyed was heartbreaking, a sharp contrast to the happiness it symbolized. At the hospital, I received treatment, needing a few stitches. But fortunately, they were almost unnoticeable. Sarah, relieved to see me all right, managed to smile as we left the hospital. While waiting for the bill, I was questioned by the police and decided to file a complaint. I also resolved to hire a lawyer and ensure Cohen and his family faced the consequences of their actions. Julie was arrested for her involvement in the assault. According to what my lawyer told me, Yvonne was taken in by Julie's parents after both her parents got into trouble with the police. I thought it was sad enough for her, but she was now facing re-education from her grandparents. Yvonne, taken in by her grandparents, apparently faced stern reprimands for her usual behavior. And she was subjected to strict discipline in an attempt to rehabilitate her. It seems that for Cohen and Julie, and especially for Yvonne, challenging days lie ahead. As for me, my injury has been healing well since then. I recently had my stitches removed, and there's hardly any sign of the injury now. Sarah has become even more popular since that day and is busily engaging in her activities. It turns out that the police and ambulance were called by one of Sarah's followers. After the shooting was over, Sarah sensed a sense of disquiet and quickly switched to live streaming to distribute the video. Thanks to that, when a big fight broke out, it seems that one of her followers took action. We're truly grateful for this intervention that helped to resolve the situation. Subsequently, Sarah wanted to thank whoever helped, so she called for them to come forward in a video. However, no one did, so she posted a video expressing her gratitude instead. When I went to the park where the disturbance took place to shoot the video, I found that the flower beds had been cleaned up. I was relieved to see that the volunteers had apparently done a good job of putting them in order after the incident. Since then, things have been going surprisingly well. My involvement in the condominium project has raised my professional profile. Thanks to that, I've been promoted and now serve as the head of the planning department. Sarah's video views are also increasing rapidly, and she herself continues to post videos with a happy look. My current husband is very caring and was quite concerned about us. Although I've fully recovered and there's no disruption to my daily life, he still occasionally checks on how I'm doing. Having a kind-hearted husband and seeing Sarah grow up healthy. And I have no problem with that, because my business and my family are prospering. I look forward to spending more happy moments with my family of 3.